My son took all my possessions, but he didn't know that I would soon become a millionaire, and he would come crawling back. That thought was the only warmth that kept me warm in this new, cold apartment, a place with walls as white and empty as my life had become after he left me. I, Edgard, a man who spent more than 60 years building things with my own hands, now lived in a space that had no trace of me. My smell, my soul, my old workshop with its aroma of wood and oil, with sunlight streaming through the cracks and illuminating the dancing dust, was just a memory. A painful memory that my own son, Lucas, turned into a signed document, a cold transaction that took everything from me. He convinced me that it was to make things easier, to take care of me in my old age. The truth was simpler. He saw me as a burden, a useless old man whose assets would be better used in his young and ambitious hands. If the coldness of my story has hooked you, subscribe to the channel. I want to share every detail of my transformation, from pain to hope, and show you how patience can be the most powerful weapon. 3 months have passed since the day he helped me pack my few clothes and brought me to this place, an anonymous building on a random street. He gave me a quick, almost rehearsed hug and said he would call every day. In the first week, he called twice. In the second, once. Then, silence. I was left with a minimal pension, enough not to starve, but too little to really live. Each day was a repeat of the previous one. Wake up, stare at the white walls, drink weak coffee, and wait for time to pass. Patience, which had always been my greatest virtue as a craftsman, was now my only companion. I spent hours sitting in the only armchair in the room, watching the city move outside, indifferent to my existence. I didn't feel sadness, not anymore. What grew inside me was something harder and colder, like the steel I used to shape. It was a calculated weight. Then, on a gray Tuesday, the phone rang. It wasn't Lucas. It was a man with a young, energetic voice who introduced himself as Daniel, director of a large technology company. He talked about an old patent registered in my name almost 20 years ago. It was for a gear mechanism I had created, a small, complex system for stabilizing delicate movements. At the time, no one was interested. My son, Lucas, when he saw the prototype years ago, laughed and called it old, complicated junk. I put it in a box, along with other inventions that the world didn't want. It turns out that the world had changed. Technology needed exactly that kind of precision for its new equipment. Daniel explained that they wanted to buy the patent. The amount he offered me made the phone almost fall out of my hand. It was an amount I couldn't spend in 3 lifetimes. After hanging up, I was silent for a long time. The money didn't bring me joy. I didn't think about trips, cars, or luxuries. I thought about Lucas. I thought about his contempt, his rush to discard me. I thought about the fake smile he wore while I signed the papers that took away the house where he grew up. That mechanism, that old junk, was my revenge, served by fate. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I made plans. Wealth wasn't the goal. It was the tool, the perfect bait for the greedy fish that I knew my son was. I transferred the money to a new account, hired a good financial advisor, and continued living exactly as before, in the same apartment, on the same pension. No one would know. I just had to wait. My only confidant was Ursula, my lifelong friend. She was the only person who visited me after Lucas abandoned me. She showed up a week after the big news, bringing hot soup and her usual worried look. I told her everything. Her eyes widened at the amount, but her concern was not about the money. "Edgard, what are you going to do?" she asked, holding my wrinkled hands. "This is a blessing, but I feel that in your heart it is becoming a weapon." I looked at her, the only person who still saw the man behind the old craftsman. "It is a weapon, Ursula, but I'm not going to use it to destroy. I'm going to use it to teach. A lesson he'll never forget." She shook her head, afraid that bitterness would consume me, but she didn't try to stop me. She knew that the wound my son had opened was too deep. Weeks turned into months. I read in the newspapers about the revolutionary new technology that used my mechanism. The company that bought the patent was growing impressively. I was an anonymous millionaire, living like a forgotten retiree. I imagined Lucas's life. He had certainly already sold the family home and the workshop. He probably bought an expensive car, took trips, threw parties. He was never good with money. His greed was greater than his common sense. I knew it was only a matter of time before the money ran out. I waited patiently, like a hunter in his den, motionless, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Every ring of the phone gave me a little start, but it was never him. I began to think that maybe he wouldn't come back, that maybe he had managed to get by. But I knew my son. His arrogance was a weakness I would exploit. And then, 6 months after I became a rich man, the phone finally rang. The name Lucas lit up on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I kept my voice calm, a little tired, as he would expect. "Hello," I said. On the other end of the line, a momentary silence, then his voice, forcedly cheerful. "Dad, How are you? Sorry I haven't called. Life has been crazy. An obvious lie. He started talking about business, about an investment that went wrong, about friends who had cheated him. The conversation was a long, winding road to the real reason for the call. He needed money. He was broke. I listened to his whole pathetic speech without interrupting. He described his problems as if they were the result of terrible luck, not his own stupidity and greed. When he finally finished, his voice was almost a whisper. Dad, I know I'm asking a lot, but could you help me? It's just for a little while until I get back on my feet. The moment had come. My revenge would not be a scream, but a whisper, as precise and deadly as the mechanism I had created. Of course, son, I said, with a calmness that surprised him. We can meet tomorrow to talk. How about that little cafe near downtown? He agreed immediately, relieved, thinking that the old fool had fallen for his talk once again. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. I sat at a table in the corner and ordered tea. Lucas arrived late, as usual. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. The expensive suit he was wearing was slightly wrinkled, as if he had slept in it. He forced a smile and sat down across from me, already starting to talk about his plans for using the money I would lend him. I let him talk. I let him build his castle of lies in the air. When he finished, waiting for my response, I picked up my cup of tea. Lucas, I began, my voice firm, I'm going to help you, but first I want to tell you a story. He looked impatient, but nodded. Do you remember my workshop, that mess of tools and parts you hated so much? He frowned, not understanding. I remember. Dad, can we talk about... I interrupted him. Do you remember a small device? A little metal box with tiny gears that I kept on a shelf? You once called it old, complicated junk. The color began to drain from his face. He remembered. That piece, my son, that junk you despised was my invention. A patent that a technology company bought from me a few months ago. I paused, savoring the moment. Lucas's face went from confusion to disbelief, then to pure shock. They paid me a fortune for it, an amount you can't even imagine. I leaned forward, and for the first time, I let all my pain and contempt show in my eyes. The money you came to ask me for, your salvation, would come from the one thing of value you couldn't take from me because you were so ignorant you didn't even see it. The silence at the table was heavy. Lucas looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The humiliation was complete. He had not been defeated by a business genius, but by the old junk he himself had discarded. I got up, took some bills out of my wallet, and placed them on the table, enough to pay for his coffee and maybe lunch. That's all you'll get from me, I said, my voice cold as ice. You wanted my possessions and you got them. Keep them. Live with the consequences of your choices. I turned my back and left the cafe without looking back. As I walked down the street in the afternoon sun, I felt no joy. I felt no euphoria. I felt a silent emptiness. Revenge was complete, but the wound was still there. The difference was that now I was free. Free from him, free from bitterness. I had my future back. A future I would build with my own hands, as I always had. And he was left behind, crawling among the wreckage of the world he himself had destroyed. The street was busy, full of people living their normal lives, but for me, it was like walking on the bottom of the sea. The sound of the city reached my ears muffled. The sun beat down on my face, but it didn't warm me. That emptiness I felt in the cafe was not regret, but completion. It was like finishing a job that took months to do. You look at the finished piece, admire the precision, but the joy of creation is gone. What remains is the silence of the space once occupied by the work. My revenge was my final masterpiece, and now that it was complete, I didn't know what to do with my hands. I didn't go back to my apartment. Instead, my legs took me almost on their own to the neighborhood where Ursula lived. She greeted me with the same look as always, a mixture of affection and concern. I didn't need to say a word. She saw in my face that it was all over. She guided me to the kitchen, sat me down, and served me a cup of hot tea. The warmth of the cup in my hands was the first real sensation I had felt since leaving the cafe. I told her everything that had happened, every word, every pause, the expression on Lucas's face when the truth hit him. She listened in silence, nodding her head from time to time. When I finished, she didn't say, I told you so, or congratulate me. She just took my hand and asked in her soft voice, and now, Edgard, what comes after revenge? Her question echoed in my head for days. And now? I had spent the last few months focused on a single goal. The waiting, the planning, the execution, all of it gave me a purpose. Now, without it, I was just a rich old man in an empty apartment. The white walls seemed to mock me, so full of possibilities and yet so empty of meaning. The money was in the bank, a huge number on a statement, but it couldn't fill the silence. I tried to go out to walk around the city. I visited museums and parks, places I never had time to see, but I felt like a ghost, watching the lives of others without participating in them. Everything seemed colorless. The weeks went by and monotony threatened to swallow me up again, this time a golden monotony but still suffocating. One afternoon, while wandering aimlessly through an older part of town, I passed an abandoned warehouse. The windows were broken, the paint peeling, but the structure was solid, made of old bricks and strong steel beams. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at it. I remembered my workshop, the smell, the light, and an idea small as a seed, began to sprout in my mind. It wasn't an idea about money or luxury. It was an idea about purpose. That night I could hardly sleep. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't bitterness that kept me awake, but excitement. The next morning I called my financial advisor, and then a lawyer named Ricardo. I asked them to investigate the ownership of the warehouse. Within a few days, I received the news that it was for sale for a price that was insignificant to me. I bought it without hesitation. Ursula was confused when I told her. An old warehouse, Edgard? What are you going to do with it? I smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't given in months. I'm going to build something, Ursula. It's the only thing I really know how to do. My plan was simple and, for me, perfect. I didn't want another workshop just for myself. I wanted a place where the knowledge I had wouldn't die with me. I wanted to create a foundation, a space where young apprentices could learn the craft of carpentry and precision mechanics, free of charge, a place where old and complicated junk would be treated like treasure. I hired a young architect named Raphael, a guy full of modern ideas, but who listened respectfully to my wishes for solid wood countertops and large windows that would let the sun in. The following months were the happiest of my recent life. I spent my days at the construction site supervising every detail. The smell of cement and new wood was like perfume to me. My hands, which had been idle for so long, began to draw, measure, and feel textures again. I was no longer waiting, I was building. The white apartment was no longer a prison, but simply a place to rest before a new day of work. Wealth, which had once been a weapon, was now the best tool I had ever had. During all this time, I had no news from Lucas, and to be honest, I didn't look for any. The image of him in the cafe was the last one I wanted to keep. I had cut the cord that connected us, and I needed it to stay that way so I could move on. But the world is small. About a year after our meeting, Ursula came to visit me at the warehouse, which was now a beautiful and functional workshop full of new tools and the sparkle of hope. She brought me a sandwich and sat on a stool, watching the first students I had selected. I saw him today, she said quietly. I didn't need to ask who she was talking about. I stopped what I was doing and stared at her. He was working, making deliveries on a bicycle. He was thin, dressed in simple clothes, but he didn't look broken, Edgard. He looked tired, but at peace. She looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I felt nothing. No joy, no pity, no anger. It was like hearing news about a stranger. His story was no longer mine. I turned and looked at my new workshop. The sound of sandpaper on wood, the smell of varnish, the lively conversations of the young apprentices. It was all real. All of it was mine, built not on the ruins of the past, but on the promise of the future. That's good, I said to Ursula, and I really meant it. It's good that he's working. Revenge gave me freedom, but it was building that gave me life. I had taught Lucas a lesson about the value of things he couldn't see, and in the process, fate taught me a lesson too, that the best way to fix what has been broken is not by taking revenge, but by building something new and stronger in its place. I looked at my hands, no longer wrinkled and useless, but covered in sawdust, the hands of a creator, and for the first time since I lost everything, I felt truly at home. The workshop, which I named the foundation, became my world. The white walls of my apartment remained the same, but now I hardly noticed them. I left early with the sun still shy and only returned at night, my body tired and my soul full. The smell of cut wood and machine oil was the air I breathed. Every screw tightened, every piece sanded, was an affirmation that I still existed, that my hands were still good for creating, not just waiting. The young people I selected were full of energy and curiosity. There was one in particular, named Gabriel, a quiet and focused young man whose eyes sparkled when I showed him a complex mechanism. He reminded me of myself when I was young, but also, painfully, of how I imagined Lucas would be. Someone who would see the beauty and precision, who would understand the silent language of gears. Ursula visited me every week, always bringing a snack and her good sense. She saw the change in me. "Your eyes are shining again, Edgard," she said one day, as she watched Gabriel finish assembling a small wooden box with perfect joints. "You didn't just build a workshop, you built a new life." And it was true. Revenge had been the end of a dark chapter, but building was the beginning of an entirely new book. I was at peace, a solid peace, built with work and purpose, something no amount of money could buy. I thought about Lucas less and less. He was a scar, a mark from the past that no longer hurt when touched. I sincerely hoped he was finding his own way, even if it was a hard and lonely one. Then, one fall afternoon, as I was explaining to Gabriel the importance of balancing on an axle, the workshop door opened. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the streetlight. He was thin, wearing simple, worn work clothes. His hair was shorter, and his face, once always ready for a fake smile, was serious, marked by a weariness that seemed to come from the soul. It took me a second to recognize him. It was Lucas. The sounds of the workshop, the sanders, the conversations, everything seemed to disappear. It was just him and me, separated by the golden dust dancing in the sunbeams. My students stopped working, sensing the tension in the air. My heart, which I thought was healed, gave a strong, painful thump. The scar opened up. He didn't move. He just stood there looking at everything. His eyes scanned the workbenches, the tools hanging on the wall, the unfinished projects. It was a look I had never seen in him before, a look of admiration, perhaps even envy. There was no arrogance, no haste. He looked like a lost traveler who had finally found a familiar place. Gabriel looked at me, confused, and I gave a small nod for everyone to continue working. The noise started again, lower, more hesitant, but it broke the spell. I walked slowly toward Lucas, my legs suddenly heavy. Each step was a battle against the instinct to send him away, to slam the door in his face and protect the peace I had worked so hard to build. "What do you want, Lucas?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. He finally looked at me. There were deep circles under his eyes, but they were clear, without the fog of greed I knew so well. I didn't come to ask for money," he said, his voice low, almost inaudible because of the sound of the machines. I wanted to see." He made a vague gesture with his hand, encompassing the workshop. "I've passed by here a few times. I saw the work. I read about the foundation in a local newspaper. They talked about a craftsman who was teaching young people for free." He swallowed hard. "They didn't say your name, but I knew. I knew it was you." Silence stretched between us again. I didn't know what to say. All the cold, cutting responses I had rehearsed months ago seemed useless now. This was not the man I had expected to humiliate. Life had already humiliated him. "I ruined everything, Dad," he continued, and the word Dad sounded strange, like a relic from a forgotten time. "I was an idiot, ambitious, blind. You were right about everything, about the money, about the friends, about me." He looked at his own hands, calloused and dirty in a way they never had been before. "That day at the cafe, you broke me, but it was good. I needed to break, because it was only when I lost everything, for real, that I began to understand what I had thrown away." He looked up again, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of deep, exhausted regret. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want a chance, not to be your son again, but to learn how to build something instead of just destroying it." His proposal hit me like a punch. It was the last thing I expected. The anger and bitterness that bubbled up inside me when I saw him at the door began to dissipate, replaced by painful confusion. Ursula had warned me that life could surprise me, but this was more than a surprise. It was a test. Fate was asking me if my new life was strong enough to withstand my past. I looked around at my workshop, my sanctuary. Bringing him here would be like inviting a ghost to live in my house, but kicking out that man who seemed so different from the son who betrayed me, what would that make me? Would I just be a bitter old man, unable to see beyond my own pain? I asked Gabriel to take care of things and went out with Lucas. We walked in silence to a small park nearby. We sat on a bench, watching the children play. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air was cold, but the afternoon sun was pleasant. Finally, I turned to him. "You don't know anything about real work," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You've always wanted the easy way out, the shortcut to wealth." He didn't argue. He just nodded. "I know, but I'm learning. Delivery work is hard. It's lonely, but it taught me one thing, the value of earning every penny with the sweat of your brow." He paused. "I sold everything, the car, the expensive clothes. I paid what I owed. I live in a small room, and for the first time in my life, I don't owe anyone anything." I listened to him, weighing every word. There was a sincerity in his voice that I couldn't deny. But trust, once broken, is like a piece of fine china. You can glue the pieces back together, but the cracks will always be there. "If I give you a chance," I said slowly, "there will be no special treatment. You'll start out like everyone else, sweeping the floor, cleaning the machines, learning to respect the tools. You won't be my son in here. You'll just be an apprentice, and the slightest sign of dishonesty, the slightest lie, and you're out. Forever. Understand?" He looked at me, and the gratitude on his face was so overwhelming that I had to look away. "Yes, Father, I understand. Thank you." The next morning, Lucas arrived 15 minutes before the workshop opened. He was wearing the same simple clothes as the day before. Without saying a word, he picked up a broom from the corner and began sweeping the floor with a concentration and care he had never devoted to anything in his life. The other apprentices looked at him curiously, but I had asked them not to ask any questions. Weeks turned into months. Lucas was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. He swept, cleaned, organized, and observed. He watched my every move, every technique I taught the others. He never asked to participate, never complained. He just worked and learned with his eyes. One night I stayed late to finish a project. Everyone had left except Lucas, who was cleaning a workbench. One of my oldest tools, a hand plane that belonged to my father, fell to the floor. The blade came loose, and the wooden handle cracked. My heart sank. It was more than a tool. It was an heirloom. I picked it up, devastated. "Let me see," Lucas said, approaching cautiously. He picked up the pieces with a delicacy that surprised me. He examined the wood, the blade, the mechanism. "I think I can fix it," he said. "You taught me indirectly. I watched how you fixed Gabriel's drill. I let him try. I sat down and watched him work. His hands, once soft and made for signing documents, were now steady and skilled. He worked for over an hour with the same patience and precision I devoted to my creations. He didn't just glue the wood back together. He reinforced it with a small fitting that was almost invisible. He sharpened the blade and recalibrated it to perfection. When he was done, he handed me the plane. It looked new, perhaps even stronger than before. I held it in my hands. It was perfect. I looked at Lucas, who was waiting for my verdict with bated breath, and for the first time in years I didn't see the traitor, the greedy one, the son who abandoned me. I saw a craftsman. Revenge freed me from bitterness. Building gave me purpose. But it was at that moment, watching my son fix what was broken, that I felt the beginning of something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. The wound was still there, but for the first time, I felt that it could one day truly heal. The road would be long, but we had taken the first step. Together, I held the plane in my hands. Its weight was familiar, but something had changed. The wood of the handle, now joined by a fitting that my son had made, seemed more alive. Lucas stood there waiting. He didn't ask for approval, he just waited for a verdict, like a student before the strictest teacher. The other young people in the workshop worked in silence, sensing that this moment was ours alone. I said nothing. I just put the tool back in its place of honor on the wall. It was a simple gesture, but for both of us, it meant the world. That night, for the first time, the scar on my chest didn't hurt. It just existed, like an old memory of a battle that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost completely. The routine in the workshop changed after that day, subtly, almost imperceptibly. The next morning, instead of handing Lucas the broom, I pointed to a pile of wooden boards in the corner. Separate the oak from the pine, check each one for knots or cracks. He looked at me for a second, surprised by the new task. Then he just nodded and started working. He spent the whole day on the floor analyzing each piece with a concentration I never thought he had. He wasn't just sorting wood, he was learning to read its stories, to see its strengths and weaknesses. I watched him from afar. He was no longer just the man who swept the floor. He was taking the first step toward becoming a man who understood materials. Gabriel, my most dedicated student, came to me at the end of the afternoon. He was a good kid with a natural talent. "Are you teaching him?" he asked, glancing discreetly in Lucas's direction. The question was simple, but the answer was not. I still didn't know what I was doing. I was following an instinct, a curiosity to see how far that regret would go. "He's learning to look," I replied, and that seemed to satisfy Gabriel. And it was the truth. I wasn't teaching Lucas to cut or measure. I was giving him the chance to learn to see the value in things, something he had never done before. Over the weekend, Ursula came to visit me, as she always did. We sat in the small kitchen I had improvised at the back of the workshop. I told her about the plane and Lucas's new task. She listened attentively, her face showing a mixture of surprise and caution. "That's good, Edgard. It's a start," she said, placing her hand on mine. "But take it slowly. Trust is like an old tree. It takes years to grow and only one blow of an axe to fell. Yours has been felled." I knew she was right. My heart was still fragile ground. "I know, Ursula, but for the first time I feel like he's not holding an axe. He's holding a seed." The months passed. Lucas continued with his simple tasks. He organized the tools, cleaned the machines, prepared the materials for the other students. He spoke little, but observed everything. I saw him following every move I made, every technique I taught, with his eyes. He was like a patient shadow, absorbing knowledge without asking for anything in return. Gradually, the other students got used to his presence. He helped them carry heavy pieces or find the right tool. He became part of the workshop, a silent but functional piece of the machinery I was building. Then we received a big project. A library in the city center ordered a community reading table. The design was complex, full of difficult joints and delicate details. It was a job that would require all our skill. I gathered the students and explained the project, assigning tasks. Gabriel would be in charge of the finishing. 2 others would work on the table legs. When I got to the most critical part, the tabletop, with its dovetail joints, I paused. All eyes were on me. I looked directly at Lucas, who was leaning against the wall waiting for his cleaning task. "Lucas," I said, and the room fell silent. "You're going to help me with the joints." The shock on his face was visible. It was the first time I had invited him to create something, instead of just cleaning up after others. "What would you do if you were in my place?" Share your opinion in the comments. Your perspective may further illuminate my path. Working side by side with him was one of the greatest challenges of my life. Every sound of the saw, every blow of the hammer seemed to echo years of silence and pain between us. At first, I was harsh and critical. I pointed out every millimeter of error, every hesitation. He didn't complain. He just listened, corrected himself, and tried again. Slowly, we found a rhythm. Our hands, one aged and experienced, the other strong and hesitant, began to move in harmony. We were building more than a table. We were trying to build a bridge over an abyss. And then disaster struck. We were working on the last joint, the most visible of all. It was Lucas's turn to make the cut. I watched him, tense. He took a deep breath, positioned the saw, and began to cut. Then a noise in the street startled him. His hand trembled for an instant, a minimal movement, but enough. The saw veered off course, cutting slightly beyond the marked line. The piece was ruined. The silence that followed was heavy, overwhelming. Lucas looked at the cut and I saw panic take over his face. The old Lucas would have hidden it, would have blamed the tool, would have lied. He stood still for a long moment, the wood in one hand, the saw in the other. He slowly placed the tool on the workbench. He didn't look at me. Instead, he picked up the ruined piece of wood and walked over to where I was standing. He held out his hand, offering me proof of his mistake. His head was bowed. "Dad, I messed up," he said, his voice low and hoarse. The word "dad," spoken in that moment of failure, carried immense weight. "I'm sorry, I messed up." He finally looked up and his eyes were filled with honest shame, a pain I recognized as genuine. He wasn't asking to be saved from his mistake, he was just confessing. In that instant, something inside me resolved itself. The revenge, the anger, all of it seemed small and distant. I saw before me not the son who had betrayed me, but a man owning up to his mistake. I took the piece from his hand and examined it. The mistake was serious, but it wasn't the end of the world. "No," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "You didn't ruin everything. You just created a problem. And we, as artisans, don't run away from problems. We solve them." He looked at me, confused. I smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Now you're going to learn how to make a real repair, one that doesn't hide the flaw but turns it into part of the piece's history." We spent the rest of the afternoon fixing that mistake. I showed him how to make a small inlay from another piece of wood, a technique that turned the scar into a beautiful detail. My hands guided his, and for the first time there was no master and apprentice, no father and betrayed son. There were just two men working together on the wood, speaking the universal language of creation. When we finished, the repair was almost a work of art, a mark that this piece had a story to tell. The table was delivered and the library loved it. They especially praised the small detail on the top, thinking it was part of the original design. That night, after everyone had left, Lucas stayed behind. He approached me hesitantly. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on the table." I knew he wasn't just talking about the table. Good wood should never be thrown away, I replied. "It just needs a little work." He nodded and a small smile, the first real smile I had seen on his face in years, appeared. I turned and looked at my workshop, full of projects and future possibilities. The wound was still there, but I realized that the best revenge had not been his humiliation, but his reconstruction, and in the process, perhaps I was rebuilding myself as well. That smile was like a wooden wedge, opening a small crack in the wall of ice that existed between us. It was the first time in a long time that I saw something genuine in him, something that wasn't calculated or motivated by greed. In the days that followed, the dynamics of the workshop continued to change. Lucas was no longer just a silent assistant. He began to ask questions. They were timid questions at first, about the type of sandpaper to use or the best way to clamp a piece in the vise, but gradually they became more complex. He wanted to know why wood behaved in a certain way, why one type of joint was stronger than another. He was no longer just following orders. He was trying to understand the soul of the craft. I answered briefly and directly, without giving much room for personal conversation. My heart was still a minefield and I treaded carefully, but I couldn't deny the spark of genuine curiosity in his eyes. It was the same spark I saw in Gabriel and the other boys. I found myself watching Lucas when he thought I wasn't looking. He ran his fingers over the wood grain with a delicacy that surprised me, as if he were trying to decipher a secret. He cleaned the tools at the end of the day, not as an obligation, but with a kind of reverence, organizing each chisel and each plane with a precision that was mine. He was, without realizing it, absorbing my world. About a month after the library table episode, I received a call. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. The voice on the other end belonged to a man named Ricardo, an old family friend who had moved to another region decades ago. He had heard about my new workshop through a mutual acquaintance and was happy to know that I was back at work. "Edgard, my friend, it's good to hear your voice," he said warmly. "Listen, I need a favor, a special job. I want to order a piece of furniture, one that only you can make." I felt a tightness in my chest. Ricardo continued, "I want a desk, exactly like the one you made for your wife years ago. Do you remember? The one made of walnut, with the secret drawers. My wife has always been in love with that piece. I want to give her a replica as a birthday present." I gasped for air for a moment. The desk, it wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a sanctuary. I built it for Lucas's mother when he was just a boy. Every detail, every joint was a declaration of love. It was at that desk that she wrote her letters, organized the household accounts, and drew in her notebooks. After she was gone, the piece became a relic, a piece of her that remained with us, and it was that relic, along with everything else, that Lucas sold without batting an eye when he took possession of our old house. The idea of recreating it seemed like desecration. My first reaction was to refuse, but then a cold, sharp thought cut through my hesitation. Maybe that was exactly what we needed. A ghost, a good ghost, one that would force us to face what we had lost. "I'll do it, Ricardo," I replied, my voice firm. "It will be an honor." When I hung up, I walked slowly over to where Lucas was sanding a board. He stopped working when he saw me approaching, sensing the change in the atmosphere. "We have a new project," I said bluntly. A special order, a walnut desk. I watched him closely, looking for any sign of recognition. He just nodded, waiting for more details. It's a replica, I continued, of the desk I made for your mother. Lucas's face drained of color. The sandpaper fell from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and pain. Dad, no, please, anything else. His voice was a whisper. I can't. You can and you will, I replied, my voice harsher than I intended. You will help me choose the wood. You will help me cut every piece. You will sand every inch of it. You will look at it every day until it is finished. You will remember. He didn't argue. He just lowered his head, defeated. That project became our own private purgatory. Working on that desk was like excavating an archaeological site of our own family. Every step of the process brought an avalanche of memories. As we selected the walnut boards, I remembered how his mother loved the dark, rich tone of that wood. She said it looked like chocolate, I commented, more to myself than to him. Lucas remained silent, but I saw his jaw tighten. The first few days were tense. The sound of the tools seemed to amplify the silence between us. But as the desk began to take shape, something changed. I found myself telling stories. Your mother asked for a secret drawer here, I said, pointing to the design. She kept poems she wrote and never showed anyone. Lucas stopped what he was doing and looked at the spot, as if he could see through the wood and find the lost poems. Another day, as we worked on the delicately curved legs of the table, I told him how she would sit in the workshop for hours, just watching me work, reading a book, happy just to share the same space. He was an attentive listener. He never interrupted. He just absorbed. I was giving him back the memories he had thrown away. And in doing so, I was revisiting them too, not with the bitterness of loss, but with the warmth of remembrance. We were rebuilding more than a piece of furniture. We were rebuilding a shared past. Then we got to the most complex part, the secret drawer mechanism. It was a system of pins and locks that I had designed especially for it. I explained how it worked to Lucas, showing him the old drawings I still kept. He studied the papers for a long time. When I started assembling the pieces, he interrupted me. Dad, he said hesitantly, what if we used a counterweight here? He picked up a pencil and, on a piece of wood, sketched a small modification to my original design. His idea was to use a small hidden metal weight that would make the drawer open more smoothly, almost magically. I looked at his drawing. Old Edgard, the wounded man, felt a pang of wounded pride. How dare he want to change my design? His mother's design? But the craftsman in me, the master, couldn't ignore the genius of the idea. It was simple, elegant, and indeed an improvement. It was a solution I had never considered. I was silent for a long moment, just looking at the sketch. Lucas held his breath, waiting for the reprimand. I took the pencil from his hand. Show me exactly how you would do it, I said, my voice neutral, and together we redrew the mechanism. At that moment, the dynamic changed forever. I was no longer just teaching. I was collaborating. He was no longer just the repentant sinner. He was a creator with his own ideas. The desk was finished the following week. It was identical to the original, but at the same time it was unique. The secret drawer opened with a soft whisper, a silent testament to our collaboration. When Ricardo came to pick it up, his eyes filled with tears. It's her, Edgard. It's exactly as I remembered, he said, marveling. After he left, Lucas and I stood in the empty workshop. The space where the desk had been seemed sacred. She would have liked your idea, I said, breaking the silence. Lucas looked at me, and for the first time, the shame in his eyes gave way to a small glimmer of pride. Thank you, Dad, he replied. The word dad no longer sounded like a plea, but like an affirmation. The wound was still there. The scar was deep. But by rebuilding that piece of wood, we had found a way to fit our broken parts together, creating something new and perhaps even stronger than before. The word dad sounded different, more solid. It didn't erase the past, but it filled some of the void his betrayal had left. In the days that followed, the workshop became a place of productive silence. It was no longer a heavy silence, full of unspoken things, but a silence of concentration, of two people who understood each other's rhythm. Lucas learned to anticipate which tool I would need next. I learned to trust that he would not let a piece of fine wood go to waste. He was still quiet, but his shoulders were no longer so bent under the weight of shame. He moved with a little more purpose, like a man who was finally building something instead of just destroying it. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He had a way with details that reminded me of myself when I was young, a patience for sanding the edges until they were perfectly smooth, an attention to the grain of the wood, treating each piece as if it were unique. That talent had always been there, buried under layers of ambition and haste. Now, without the pressure of wanting to be big and important overnight, he was discovering the simple pleasure of doing something well, and I, who had planned to see him crawl, found myself silently cheering for his every small success. Revenge is a strange dish. Sometimes, while you wait for it to cool, your own heart warms. A About 2 weeks after we delivered the desk, the workshop phone rang. I answered, expecting another local order, but the voice on the other end was Daniel's, the young director of the technology company. His energy seemed to vibrate through the line. "Edgard, I hope I'm not bothering you," he said, "but I can't stop thinking about your patent. The elegance of that mechanism is rare." Our team of engineers was impressed. I thanked him, not knowing where this conversation was going. "Look, I'll be blunt," he continued. "We don't just want your old patent. We want the brain behind it. We want you." He explained that the company was developing a new line of high-precision equipment and was facing a problem that no software could solve. They needed a mechanical, physical solution, something ingenious and reliable that didn't depend on code or electricity. They wanted to hire me as a consultant. The amount he offered as monthly pay was more than I earned in a year in my old life. "And what's more," Daniel said, "we'd like to visit your workshop, see your work environment, understand your process. We'll be in your city next week. Would that be possible?" I felt a knot in my stomach. My workshop, my new sanctuary, a place of healing and quiet work, about to be invaded by the modern world I had left behind. But I couldn't refuse. It was validation, recognition that went beyond money. "Yes, it will be a pleasure to have you," I replied. When I hung up, Lucas was standing across the workshop, pretending to organize a set of chisels, but I could see from his face that he had heard enough. The color drained from his cheeks, the same pallor I saw when I mentioned his mother's desk. He looked like a ghost. "Was it that man from the patent office?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "They want to come here. They want to hire me." Lucas dropped the tool he was holding. The sound of metal hitting the wooden bench echoed in the silence. He didn't look at me. Instead, he looked at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "They're going to see you like this," he murmured, "in this place, with me." His shame was almost palpable. I understood everything in that instant. To the world, to a man like Daniel, he was the failed son who, after stealing from his father and losing everything, had returned to work as a simple assistant. The story was ugly, and his presence there beside me made it real and visible. My original revenge, public humiliation, was being offered to me on a silver platter. I could let Daniel and his team come, and they would see Lucas in his diminished position. They would see me as the genius rescued from obscurity, and him as the fool who almost destroyed him. The old wound inside me itched, tempted by the idea. It would be so easy. I spent the rest of the day quiet, processing the situation. Lucas worked mechanically without saying a word. His every movement was stiff, haunted. That night, after he left for the small room he rented nearby, I sat in the dark workshop for a long time. The smell of sawdust and glue calmed me. I thought about the desk. I thought about the small improvement he had made, that detail that made the piece even more special. I thought about the hesitant smile on his face when I said his mother would have liked the idea. That moment of joint creation seemed more real and more important than any plan for revenge. Humiliating him now would not fix anything. It would only break what little we had begun to rebuild. The next morning, when Lucas arrived, I was waiting for him. His eyes were sunken. He had barely slept. "We need to talk," I said, pointing to 2 wooden benches. He sat down, tense, waiting for the sentence. "About Daniel's visit," I began. "I know what you're thinking." He swallowed hard. "Dad, I can disappear for a few days. I'll say I'm sick. That way you don't have to." "No," I interrupted him. My voice was firm. "You're not going anywhere. When they arrive, you'll be here, by my side." He looked at me, confused. "But why?" "I'll embarrass you." "You would only embarrass me if you continued to be the man you were 6 months ago," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "That man is no longer here. The man I see in front of me is a craftsman, a good craftsman, and he has good ideas." I got up and took out the old patent drawings that Daniel had bought. I placed them on the counter in front of Lucas. "I created this 20 years ago. It's good, but it's old. Technology has changed. Materials have changed. If we're going to work with them, we need to offer something new, something better." I pushed a pencil and a blank piece of paper toward him. "Before they arrive, the 2 of us are going to create an improved version of this mechanism. And when Daniel asks about the project, I'm going to tell him the truth, that it was a team effort." Lucas looked from the paper to my face, his eyes filling with an emotion I couldn't decipher. It was more than gratitude. It was shock, disbelief. I was offering him not just forgiveness, but partnership. I was giving him a seat at the table. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You did it with the desk," I reminded him. "You saw a flaw in my design and made it better. Do it again." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he picked up the pencil. His hand still trembled a little, but he began to draw. At that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. The best revenge was not to see my son on his knees. It was to see him rise, stronger and wiser, and to know that I had had a hand in it. We were ceasing to be just father and son, creditor and debtor. We were becoming partners, and together, we would show the world what we could build. The wound was still there, but now, instead of an ugly scar, it was becoming the joint that held 2 previously broken pieces of wood together, creating something new and unexpectedly beautiful. The days leading up to Daniel's visit were a strange mix of rush and calm. The urgency to create something new and impressive filled the air, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a desperate urgency. It was the kind of energy I felt when I was young, faced with a challenge that excited me. Lucas, after that initial shock, threw himself into his work in a way I had never seen before. He didn't didn't say much, but his drawings spoke for him. He filled sheet after sheet with variations on my original mechanism, exploring new materials, new angles. He thought of things that my mind, accustomed to steel and brass, didn't consider: lighter alloys, polymer components that reduced friction. It was as if the shame that paralyzed him had turned into fuel for creativity. I watched him, pretending to be busy with my own tasks. He had the gift, the same gift his mother had for seeing beauty in simple things, and my gift for understanding how things worked. The combination was powerful. One day, he showed me a sketch. "Dad, what if we used a magnetic system here?" he suggested, pointing to a part of the mechanism. Two small magnets with opposite poles could create a tiny suspension, almost without contact. The movement would be floating. I looked at the drawing. It was bold, it was modern, and it was brilliant. My old patent was about mechanical precision, about the perfect fit of teeth and gears. His idea took the concept of precision into a new century. "It's a good idea," I admitted, and a small smile appeared on his face. It was a tired smile, but genuine. At that moment, I was not the judge, and he was not the defendant. We were two craftsmen solving a problem. On the day of the visit, the workshop was impeccably clean. Not the sterile cleanliness of a laboratory, but the organized cleanliness of a place where work is respected. The tools were in their proper places, the wood stacked by type and size. The prototype of our new mechanism was covered with a cloth on the main workbench. Lucas was pale and quiet. He wore a simple, clean shirt, and his hands, though stained from work, were well cared for. He looked like a man trying to be invisible. "Breathe, Lucas," I said to him, minutes before Daniel arrived. "The work will speak for us." He just nodded, unable to look me in the eye. Daniel arrived on time, accompanied by an older engineer, a gray-haired man named Marco. Daniel was exactly as I remembered him from the phone, young, full of energy, with a quick gaze that seemed to absorb everything. He shook my hand firmly. "Edgard, it's an honor. This place is incredible," he said, looking around with genuine admiration. "It smells like creation." Then his gaze fell on Lucas, who was standing a step behind me. I didn't hesitate. "Daniel, Marco, I want you to meet my partner, Lucas." I put my hand on Lucas's shoulder. He flinched for a second, then straightened up. The word partner hung in the air. Daniel smiled and extended his hand to Lucas. "Nice to meet you, Lucas. Your father has spoken highly of your talent." Lucas shook his hand, surprised. "The pleasure is mine," he managed to say. We led them to the workbench. "As I said on the phone, your original patent is fantastic," Daniel began. "But we're curious to know if you've thought of any improvements, something we can apply to our new projects." I pulled the cloth away, revealing the prototype. It was a beautiful piece, a blend of my classic style with the cleaner lines and modern materials suggested by Lucas. Marco, the engineer, leaned forward, his eyes shining with interest. He picked up the piece carefully, as if it were a jewel. He activated the mechanism. The movement was silent, fluid, almost supernatural. There was no soft click of my old gears. There was only a whisper, a perfect glide. "Incredible," Marco murmured, looking at me. "How did you eliminate friction at this level?" I looked at Lucas. It was his moment. "It was Lucas's idea," I said, my voice clear and firm in the silence of the workshop. "He can explain it better." All heads turned to him. For a moment, panic took over his face. He looked at me, and I gave him a slight nod. He took a deep breath, and then he began to speak. His voice was low at first, but he gained confidence as he described his idea. He talked about the magnets, about the new alloys, about how the combination of my mechanical design and his magnetic solution created something entirely new. He picked up a pencil and paper and began to draw, explaining the principles so clearly and passionately that even I was impressed. He was no longer the failed son. He was an inventor, a creator defending his work. Marco and Daniel listened intently, asking technical questions that Lucas answered accurately. They didn't see the ugly history behind our relationship. They saw two professionals, two generations of talent working together. When Lucas finished, there was a moment of silence. Daniel looked at Marco, who simply nodded with a smile of admiration. "Gentlemen," Daniel said, turning to us, "this is more than we expected. This isn't an improvement, it's a revolution. We want this, and we want you both leading the implementation team." He looked directly at Lucas. "Your vision is exactly what our company needs." Lucas was speechless. He just looked at me, and in his eyes there was a mixture of shock and gratitude so deep that it almost made me look away. The validation he had sought his entire life in the wrong way, with haste and greed, had finally arrived. And it came through honest work, patience, and collaboration. After they left, leaving behind the promise of a contract that would change our lives forever, the workshop fell silent. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles just like in my old workshop. But now it didn't feel like a sad memory. It felt like a promise. Lucas stood in the same spot, staring at the prototype on the workbench. "I don't know what to say, Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "The work says it all." I walked over and stood beside beside him. We both looked at the piece we had created together. It was more than metal and magnets. It was proof that it was possible to rebuild something broken. It was proof that forgiveness sometimes is not a word, but an action. It's giving someone the chance not just to apologize, but to make amends. The revenge I had planned, cold and empty, would have left me alone with my money and my wounded pride. But this joint creation, this moment of shared pride, that was something much more valuable. The wound was still there. The scar would never completely disappear, but around it something new and strong had grown. And for the first time I felt that my workshop, my sanctuary, was complete again. Not because I had it back, but because I had my son back. Not the ambitious son who betrayed me, but the craftsman he should always have been. The following days were strange. The contract arrived by courier, a thick document full of complicated words that spoke of millions. We sat side by side at the small kitchen table, Lucas and I, reading everything in silence. It was real. The money, the partnership, the future. It was all ours. When we finished, Lucas pushed the papers to my side of the table. "It's yours, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm not entitled to any of this. I'll work for you as an employee. Pay me a fair wage, that's all I ask." I looked at him. There was a sincerity in his eyes that hurt me. He was trying to punish himself, to put himself in the place he thought he deserved. But that wasn't my plan. My revenge was different. "We built the new prototype together, Lucas," I said calmly. "The best ideas were yours. The contract is in both our names. We are partners, 50% each." He shook his head in disbelief. "I can't accept it. After everything I've done, what you did is in the past." I cut him off. "What we're doing now is the present. You're going to accept your share because a partner doesn't abandon the other, and we have a lot of work ahead of us." He didn't argue anymore. He just stood there, staring at his hands, as if he didn't recognize them. That gesture, that initial refusal, told me more than any apology. He was changing. The greed that had blinded him was being replaced by a shame that was slowly turning into responsibility. The first payment from Daniel's company landed in our joint account a week later. The amount was so large that it looked like a typo. We went to the bank together, me in my usual simple clothes and Lucas in a shirt that had seen better days. The bank manager, a woman named Anna, treated us with a formality that bordered on exaggeration. She didn't know our story. She saw only a father and son who had suddenly become important customers. On the way out, we stopped on the sidewalk. The noise of the city seemed distant. "What do we do now?" Lucas asked, his voice almost a whisper. The question wasn't about the money. It was about us. "First," I said, "you're going to rent a decent place to live, close to the workshop. Then we'll buy the best equipment money can buy, and then we'll get to work." He nodded. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, something that went beyond the relief of having money. It was the sparkle of someone who had rediscovered a purpose. Weeks turned into months. The workshop expanded. We bought the warehouse next door and turned it into a modern laboratory. With machines I had only seen in magazines, Lucas threw himself into his work with fierce dedication. He spent days and nights there, testing materials, perfecting every detail of our mechanism. He didn't buy luxury cars or expensive clothes. His only luxury was a simple but comfortable apartment and the peace of mind of being able to work without the weight of debt and failure on his shoulders. I watched him from afar. Our relationship was professional. We talked about gears, deadlines, projects. Difficult words like forgiveness, betrayal, and love remained untouched. Perhaps it was better that way. We were building something new on the rubble of the past. Talking about the ruins could shake the foundation, but the past is never buried forever. It always finds a way to come back. One Thursday afternoon, while I was sanding a piece of wood, a man walked into the workshop. He was tall, wore an expensive suit that didn't fit in with the surroundings, and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lucas, who was on the other side of the shed, froze. He turned pale, and the tool in his hand fell to the floor with a metallic clang. The man walked slowly toward him. "Lucas, my friend, long time no see," said the man, his voice soft as velvet. "I hear you've done well for yourself. It's good to see a friend prosper." Lucas didn't answer. He just stared at the man as if he were seeing a ghost. "Who are you?" I asked, approaching them. My voice came out harsher than I intended. The man turned to me. "Ricardo," he introduced himself, extending his hand. I didn't shake it. "Lucas's old business partner. We had some business together." I looked at my son. The fear on his face was evident. "We weren't partners," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "I owed him money." Ricardo laughed, an unpleasant sound. Details. The important thing is that now you can pay, right? With interest, of course. Friendship interest." He looked around, eyeing our new equipment with a covetous gaze. "Nice place you have here. Looks like the old man's project finally made some money." The way he said old man was a calculated insult. Anger rose in my throat, hot and bitter. It was the same anger I felt when I found myself alone in the white-walled apartment. "Get out of my workshop," I said, my voice low and controlled. Ricardo ignored me and turned to Lucas. "You know, Lucas, I have some documents, some promissory notes, and I also have a good memory. I remember you laughing at your father, saying how easy it was to take everything from him. Imagine if your new partners at the tech company heard that story. They like reliable partners, don't they?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and dirty. Blackmail. Lucas closed his eyes eyes, defeated. All the progress, all the trust he had been rebuilding, everything seemed about to fall apart. At that moment I had a choice. I could let Lucas deal with his own mess. I could say it was his problem, a consequence of his past choices. The wounded part of me, the part that still remembered the humiliation, wanted to do just that. But then I looked at the man in front of me. He was the craftsman who had redesigned my badge. He was the partner who worked late into the night. He was no longer the same man who had betrayed me. The revenge I wanted was not against the Lucas who was there, but against the ghost of the Lucas he had been. And that ghost, I realized, was already being destroyed day after day by hard work and regained dignity. Protecting what we were building was more important than punishing the past. "How much does he owe you?" I asked Ricardo, my voice firm. Ricardo smiled. Victorious. He thought he had won. "With interest, let's say a six-figure sum would settle everything, and keep our little story a secret." I walked over to my desk, opened a drawer, and took out a checkbook. Lucas looked at me, his eyes wide. "Dad, no, please, I'll work something out." "I know you will," I replied without looking at him. "But we're partners, and partners solve problems together." I filled out the check for the amount Ricardo asked for. I signed my name, Edgard, with the same firmness with which I signed my projects. I handed the paper to Ricardo. "Here's your money," I said. "Now listen carefully. You're never coming here again. You will never speak to my son again. If I hear your name again, I will use a much larger portion of this money to ensure that all your business is investigated by the authorities. Am I clear?" Ricardo's smile disappeared. He saw something in my eyes that made him back down. He took the check, crumpled it in his pocket, and left without saying another word. When the door closed, a heavy silence fell over the workshop. Lucas was leaning against the wall, his face hidden in his hands. He began to cry. It wasn't loud crying, but quiet, painful sobs from a broken man. I didn't approach him, I just waited. After a long time, he raised his head. His eyes were red. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you do that?" "I didn't deserve it." "No," I agreed. "The man who left me in that apartment didn't deserve it, but that man doesn't work here anymore." I approached him and put my hand on his shoulder. It was the first time I had touched him affectionately since his return. "The man who is here is my partner, and I protect my partner. The money I paid wasn't to save you from your past. It was an investment in our future." He looked at me and I saw understanding dawn on his face. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the debt. It was giving him the chance to pay it off the right way, with work, loyalty, and maybe one day, with love. The scar of betrayal was still there, but now it no longer separated us. It was the mark that proved we had survived something terrible, and that together we were stronger than anything that tried to break us. I discovered that rebuilding is more powerful than destroying. If this story touched you, subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to rebuild a relationship that seemed lost? See you soon.